A core element of being effective with inclusive marketing, therefore any inclusive marketing strategy, is data. We've got to know not just the rates at which your customers achieve success overall, but we also need to know what that data looks like by subgroup, in particular whenever you're looking at people from underrepresented and underserved communities. In other words, we need to find out if everyone is achieving success at the same rates. Now, I've noticed that as I talk to different people and marketers about this, at times the thought of capturing and analyzing data in this manner feels uncomfortable. So I thought it would be helpful to have a dialogue about this with someone who is steeped in data, particularly by subgroup, all day, every day. So after this short break, you'll hear my conversation with Deborah Pickett, who'll be bringing her expertise with data in the education system and will apply it to what you do in marketing. Now, this isn't Deborah's first time on the show. She stopped by way back in episode number 19 for the show, The Critical Link Between Equity and Customer Success. It was a really great episode, if I do say so myself. So if you haven't listened, I'll drop a link to it in the show notes so you can check it out. Also, full disclosure for you, Deborah is my sister. Did you know that most businesses only use 20% of their data? That's like reading a book with most of the pages torn out or paying for a coffee that's just 1/5 full. Point is, you miss a lot unless you use HubSpot. Their customer platform gives you access to the data you need to grow your business. The insights trapped in emails, call logs, and transcripts, all that unstructured data that makes all the difference. Because when you know more, you grow more. And when you get a full cup of coffee, you can do more too. But I digress. Visit HubSpot.com today. Hey, Deborah, thanks so much for joining me today. How are you?
Doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I'm really excited about this chat. I think it's been on the agenda for over a year now, and we're just now getting to it, but it's still just as relevant as ever. But before we get into all of that, tell the people, who are you and what do you do?
So my name is Deborah Pickett. I am a math coach and also an instructional trainer at a middle school, which means that I spend my days around 11 to 14-year-olds who are in 6th to 8th grade. So I know that may sound scary for a lot of people, but it's actually, I love it and I enjoy doing it. But a lot of people will ask, like, what is a coach? And so I try to describe it as I do trainings, but more importantly, I provide support to teachers. I'm in their classrooms, I'm in meetings with them formally and informally, and I'm collecting data on instructional practices in the classroom. And I'm also collecting data on whether students are learning what they're supposed to learn. And so through that process, it's very cyclical. It's a matter of figuring out what's working, what's not working, and if there's something that's not working, we make a plan for it. But when we do find that we have success, we definitely celebrate it because teaching is hard. It's hard. And many people make it look easy. And for those that can make it look so, it's fantastic. But there's a lot that goes into it. And so we take the wins when they come.
Oh, definitely appreciate the work that you're doing. It is very much needed. We appreciate that you love it and that you're doing it, and we're all in a better space because of it. So thank you. All right. So, what is the role of data in ensuring that all the people that you serve, in your case, it's students, but I think one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you today, because even though your work is based in schools and education, the principles are applicable across the board, right? So, what would you say is the role of data in ensuring that all the people that you're serving achieve success at the same rates?
So I think in general, there's maybe two buckets of data that I look at, and one is teacher data. In other words, what are those practices that teachers are implementing in the classroom? Because we know that certain practices lead to positive student outcomes. But at the same time, I'm also looking at student data. And so I use the term, well, two terms actually, qualitative data and quantitative data. So a lot of times we think of data as quantitative, 50% of students are doing this, 75% of students are are doing this. But there's also that element of the qualitative data where you're just having conversations with teachers and asking them questions and listening and reflecting, but also doing the same thing with students. And so when I'm in classrooms, I'm asking students, what are you learning? What does that look like? Can you show me? How does this connect to what you've learned before? It's finding out, are they learning what they're supposed to learn? And how do they know? And so it can be that specific on the teacher side. But then also, when I look at student data in particular, it could be looking at classroom data. How are students performing on a particular question, on an assessment, or on a particular skill? But going more broadly, it's also looking at how are we performing on district assessments? How do we compare to other schools similar to us? How are we performing over time? The same thing with state assessments, looking at that historical data, looking at that comparative data to us compared to other schools like us. But then there's this other element of it where we dig into not just overall proficiency, what percent of our students are learning what they're supposed to learn, but then we also dig into subgroups. In other words, if we're looking at the subgroups of students, whether it's by grade level or by course or by ethnic subgroup or students with disabilities, are those students also performing at the same levels that the masses are? And so it's really interesting, but that's how we know if what we're doing is working for students.
Okay, so you said a lot there, and I so appreciate it. It's super interesting and fascinating. So I want to kind of tackle a couple of different things that you said. One of the things that I found really interesting was that you're looking at data from both the student perspective as well as the teacher perspective. And I feel like a lot of times, from a business standpoint, when we're looking at customer success, we don't always look at what is the environment that we've created and how the environment impacts success. I think sometimes we just tend to blame it on, oh, this person isn't qualified, or this person didn't apply themselves, or this person didn't do that. And it's often never that black and white. And you have to look at the other side, which I just found really enlightening. And I'm wondering if there's any types of things in particular that we should be thinking about or looking towards whenever we're taking that internal view of like what it is that we're doing that has a positive or negative impact on success.
Yeah, it's really being open to not jumping to conclusions right away. Like, oh, well, let me glance at this data for 5 minutes, and I'll have all the solutions and all the answers quickly. It doesn't always work out so nice and neatly. One of the things we talk about often is triangulating data. For example, if you just look at teacher data, or you just look at student data, or you just look at that big picture, you miss all of the things that are happening when you look at it all together and see what story that data is telling you.
Yeah. All right. So it's 2025, right? And I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and they're like, is it necessary to be collecting data by race and gender? Like, by putting so much focus on it, are we perpetuating issues that would naturally or organically go away if we stopped emphasizing it more? And I tried to spend some time really thinking about that. And I was like, no, if we don't look at it, or at least where we are in this country, I feel like maybe it's different in other countries, but in this country, I feel like it's super important for us to look at that data because I feel like there is data. I can't point to like what specific data source it is, but I feel like there's enough evidence that shows if we don't look at this data, that there are certain subgroups, generally those that are part of underrepresented and underserved communities, their outcomes are going to not be the same as others. Am I thinking about this in the right way?
Yeah, so in that perfect world, we'd like to say that demographics don't determine a student's destiny, but unfortunately, we know that that's not the case. And so, because it's so important that we're meeting the needs of all students, we have to actually look at the data for all students and not just as that one big group, but in those smaller pockets. So I'll give a personal example and then kind of circle back. So I fit into multiple subgroups all at once. I'm a Black female. I'm now middle aged, which I have to admit, I have a food sensitivity. And so sometimes, depending on my circumstance, if I'm in a restaurant, the thing that's going to be most prominent for me is my food allergy. But then there's other times where, I had a knee injury a few years ago, and I was oh so thankful that in the public restroom, there was a bar that I could use as I was trying to figure out my whole knee situation.
Hmm.
Oh my gosh, I'm so thankful that this bar was here. It wasn't designed for me, but because that establishment had planned for people with disabilities, in that moment when I happened to fit in that category, I was so thankful that it was there because I wasn't even aware of it being there prior to the moment when I needed it personally.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, when we think to one size fits all, this should work for everyone, we miss out on all of those nuances to make an experience better for everyone. And that's what it's all about. We want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all of our students. So on the business side, you want to make sure you're meeting the needs of all of your customers.
Yeah, I love that you said this whole one size fits all doesn't really work. Like one of my pet peeves, one of my soapbox things is like one size fits all is a lie. Like it is a lie. And so we have to think about and the people that we're serving as individuals, and sometimes we can group them into different categories, whether it's neurodivergence, whether it's race or gender, whether it's sexual orientation, whether it's age, body size, type, et cetera, abilities. Sometimes there are similar challenges that people experience or similar needs or accommodations that exist. And if we don't take the time to look to see how those differences may or may not, right, may have an impact on success, we're just going to look at our success numbers overall and, hey, sorry, too bad for you if you're not able to meet the standard. And that's not really a good thing. It's a good thing for everyone involved when success levels increase across the board, right? So
Absolutely. And that's the thing, like, when we focus on these pockets, like everybody wins.
yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'm imagining that there's like this objection that exists. Not imagining, I've heard it. By looking at certain subgroups, particularly the ones that aren't achieving success at the same rate, are we ignoring, not doing right by taking time away or resources away from other students who may already be at or above that line? Students or people are like, let's say if we say, all right, people who are neurodivergent, for instance, we're finding that they aren't achieving success at the same rate. So by putting resources or attention and energy into them, is there a downside to other people who aren't neurodivergent?
I don't think so. So I was at a training recently, and we were reading an article on belonging in education, actually. And one of the things they said is that they focus on knowing the student, like the whole student, but more
Yeah.
specifically, they said that what they do is they focus on the exceptional learner first. And by doing that, when you think about, okay, so what are the needs of these exceptional learners, these pockets of students? Well, guess what? There might be students that may have those exceptions that maybe don't have that label, for lack of a better term, or haven't been
Right.
identified yet. Or maybe they need it and aren't quite yet aware, like myself with the bar in the bathroom, didn't
Right.
really know at the time, oh, I didn't know I needed it. Or maybe I don't need it all the time, but because it was there in place for someone else, I get to benefit from that. And so when we think about making sure that we're focusing on those pockets of students, we increase our outcomes overall, but also we're meeting the needs of every child. And, a common phrase for us is all means all. When we say that we want to see high outcomes of learning for all students, all means every student, not most, not some.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. All means all, right? Yeah, I think that like we see a lot of people who define their market as like women from 18 to 84 or families from, families, right? And so like families really like families can look a lot of different ways, right? Women from 18 to 84, like that's a lot of different types of women, right? Like, so is it really all of these women? And if you're saying it's all means all, right? Like, let's get serious about that.
Right. And if just to add to that, like, so maybe you can meet the needs of all of those women 18 to 84, but that doesn't mean that all of those people need the same exact thing. Maybe you have
Yeah.
products or things designed for that, maybe 18 to 35, and then maybe you've
Yeah.
got, 36 to 55, and then you've got that 56 to 84. Like, it doesn't mean that it all has to look the same. It means that, yes, we're catering to the very specific needs of each of these individual groups of people so that as a whole, we can say that we are meeting the needs from 18 to 84.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Love all of this. Love all this. Have you received any resistance from people whenever you suggest or whenever you're looking at data by subgroups to see how people are performing or evaluate how you all are doing?
I think that sometimes people may be initially uncomfortable, and that's because we like to think of everybody's the same.
Mhm.
Everybody just fits in the same happy bucket together, and so when you start talking about differences or okay, this group of students, it often may feel like finger pointing or oh, I didn't do something or I didn't do it right or I didn't do it well. And it's really not about that at all. It's about, okay, so we've identified this area. What are we going to do next? So
Mm.
it's not a, oh, I did a terrible job with that. It's, you know what? I wasn't aware of that before, but now that I'm aware, I'm going to be more mindful. And sometimes, most of the time, that being more mindful means that we're doing that preparation on the front end rather than, oops, I noticed this data point. Now let me try to fix it on the back end. You have to be
Yeah.
more proactive than reactive. And so when we put it in that perspective of just those real life scenarios that we've just talked about, where everybody's not the same, everybody's needs aren't the same, and so we need to identify that sometimes students, depending on their circumstance, are going to need something slightly different, but that doesn't mean that, oh my gosh, I suck as a teacher, or oh, I'm, a terrible business owner. It just means, okay, now that I'm aware, and sometimes, things just aren't in because of our lived experiences, we don't know, we're not aware. But once we are aware, once you know better, you do better.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Do you have any examples of when looking at subgroups, identifying a problem, and then making adjustment like has made a positive impact?
Absolutely. One example in particular, a few years ago, we were looking at data by course. And so we have students that are in what we call accelerated math, meaning they complete more than a year's worth of math within a year's worth of time. So, one of the things that as we started looking at subgroups more frequently, we noticed there was disproportionate representation in those accelerated math classes compared to our overall school population. And so, again, doing some digging, trying to figure out, well, why is that the case? We found out that some of it really just went back to systems because, when you think about, your initial response might be, oh my gosh, like, why don't we have enough Hispanic students or why don't we have enough Black students or multiracial students in these courses? But then when we looked at the process, it was, hey, teachers, make a list of the students you think would be great for acceleration.
Hmm.
And there may or may not have been some data that was involved in that process, or the data that we used because that was the way it always been done. Oh, we're going to use these two data points, ignoring 7 other data points. And so what we did was we changed the system of identifying students and went from, hey, make a list and submit it, and we'll schedule the students, to let's look at the long range data of every single student that enters our school. Then what we identified was not only were our students more representative of the school population in those accelerated math classes, but also what we found is that our students were outperforming not only students in schools like ours, but also in schools that were not like ours. And so it
Right.
was just nice to see that given the opportunity to thrive, our kids were thriving. And so what we didn't do was say, well, this is the way we've always done it. We've always had a list. We've
Yeah.
always just done it. Like instead of staying stuck in that, we had to look at it and explore and then come up with a new solution. And sometimes our solutions work. We're like, okay, I've got a solution. Let's implement it. And it works great. But real life tells us that sometimes things don't always work out exactly as planned, and you have to be willing to stop and reflect and gather more data or do more problem solving to figure out what the root cause is and then move forward and still make sure you're monitoring that data to see that it's successful. Another example is when I first started working at my school, about a decade ago. We had a very small number of English language learners at our school. Maybe I'd say maybe 2 to 3% of our overall student population. Well, in the last few years, we're now at about 10%, roughly, give or take. And so when we looked at some subgroup data, we identified that this particular subgroup of students were not performing at the same level as the masses. So many would think, oh, well, English isn't their first language. So, that's the reason. Okay, problem solved. But instead, it's okay. So, what do we do about this? What are the resources? What training is necessary? What tools are needed to support teachers as they're supporting students, but also to support the students? And if we didn't look at the data, we would have just continued with business as usual, not realizing that we needed to solve the problem because we needed to meet the needs of all of our students.
Okay. I love both of these examples. And I think what stands out to me most is that you talked about the systemic change that needed to happen, not just looking at the data and saying, oh, okay, like this is what's happening, like to change outcomes over time and have them be prolonged. And it sounds like you had pretty remarkable change, is that you changed or evaluated the system and how maybe the system wasn't serving all and how the system could be improved to give everyone that same opportunity to achieve. And maybe there were some people who were in these advanced classes that maybe weren't quite ready for it, but because of certain, like a limited data set, it appeared that they might have been, or the perception was that they might have been, but they actually weren't, like, so
Mhm.
I think whenever you leave things up to humans alone, sometimes we subject ourselves to unconscious bias, right? Nothing necessarily malicious, but like we are human and we've got some bias associated with that. And so whenever you take into account data and really look for the story behind the data, I think that's it. Because I think sometimes I see you nodding your head. I think that's where sometimes people may not really grasp this concept of what we're talking about, because they might say, well, I'm looking at the data and the data shows that this, this group isn't blah, 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 or whatever. But it's really like, what's the story behind it? Can you talk a little bit about like finding the story of what behind the data? I don't know if I'm even saying or categorizing this right, but yeah.
Yeah, it's actually, I use that phrase all the time, and I kind of chuckled because I was listening to one of your podcasts recently and you're
Hey.
like, images tell a story. And I'm like, how does she know? I feel the same way about data. And it does, it speaks to us, but we have to make sure that we move beyond the words on the page, the numbers on the page, to actually figure out, that deeper dive, that character analysis when we think about like under a reading lens. But what is it telling us? Like, if we just look at it and say, oh, 80% of our students are proficient, yay us. Or, okay, 80% of our students are proficient, but what about the sixth graders? What about the students in accelerated math? What about our
Mm.
English language learners? What about our Black students? If we're not looking at all of that, we're missing all of the nuance of the story that the data is telling us. So we have to make sure that we're prepared to look for all of that nuance, not just oh, yep, here's my pretty graph. This is what it says, next. But really digging into the data and figuring out what it's saying, but not just stopping at what is the data saying, but then digging into why is the data telling us this, but then again, not stopping there. What are we going to do about it? Or do we need to
Yeah.
do something about it? Recently, I was looking at some data, and I noticed that a pocket of students by ethnicity was not doing well compared to the other groups. So, in having a conversation with another colleague, the colleague was like, well, what about the other subgroups that these students are in? And so when I looked at this particular subgroup, which was small, it was a very small pocket of our students that happened to all be in this subgroup. What I realized is they crossed multiple subgroup lines. So when it looked like the story might have been telling us, okay, there's an issue here with this population of students based on their ethnicity, what that deeper dive did was it said, well, really, what's happening is many of these students in this category also happen to be in another subgroup based on a disability status or another status. And so, because there were so few, when you're like, okay, well, maybe I've got this group of 15 students, and four of them maybe aren't performing, you're like, oh my goodness, what's going on? But then when you're like, okay, these other subcategories are the ones that really are the area of prominence. Again, not that you dismiss it, but if you can go to one conclusion that's often the wrong conclusion, rather than focusing on, again, that root cause. Well, what's the reason for this happening? Rather than, oh, okay, we need to do a training on this because this is what the data says, when really we didn't really listen to the story of what the full picture of what the data was telling us.
Yeah. Love, love, love all of these examples. Okay, I've got another podcast recommendation for you. It's Augmenters, hosted by Julie Meyer and Jimmy Edgerton, and it's brought to you by the HubSpot Podcast Network, the audio destination for business professionals. So on this show, Julie and Jimmy dive into mentoring and explore ways to augment and refresh the mentoring environment. They're using 8 core principles that weave relevant spirit guides and diverse guests. And Julie and Jimmy use a lot of humor and practical tips to help mentors and mentees get further, faster together. There's so many great episodes to tune into for this show, but one that you might find especially interesting is their latest episode, number 120, Mentoring Across Gender, Men as Allies and Mentors. Listen to Augmenters wherever you get your podcasts. This is not your first time as the guest on this show. I'll drop a link to the previous episodes you were on in the show notes because it was really, really great. It was all about equity, which we do need to be thinking about from a marketing perspective. But you gave this analogy about the whole, or this principle, I don't know, the water versus the fish principle. And like, it just so stuck with me all these years later, right? And so I feel like so much of what we're talking about today is still related very much to this whole water versus fish principle. Well, can you just go and kind of redo, like, can you just explain quickly what this is? We get everybody up to speed, and then I'm going to ask my question.
Okay, so I'm going to try. I hope I do it justice as you just described it. But, when we think about, is it the water versus the fish? Well, if the fish aren't doing well, it's so easy to say, oh, well, it's just this kind of fish, they don't survive very long. And, it's got to be the fish, but maybe those fish are swimming around in some pretty murky water, And so we've got to be able to identify what is the true reason for things happening. It's so easy to say, oh, well, on this day, this customer or this student, this was going on versus, this is more of a trend. This is part of the environment. This is part of the design. This is part of the structure. We need to evaluate our systems and figure out what we can do so that the end result is better for our students or for our customers.
So if we say, listen, all right, we're noticing that our customers who are immigrants aren't achieving success at the same rate that other people are. we shouldn't say, oh, you know what? I mean, what did you, it's because they're immigrants, and maybe making a number of different assumptions or whatever, instead of just saying, oh, it's because they're immigrants, maybe, and, assuming that that exists, you were saying is what we should say, what is it about the environment, the systems that we have that make it so that this subgroup of people, in particular in this example, immigrants, aren't performing as well as everyone else, and what can we do to support them to ensure that whatever barriers exist for them don't exist anymore? Is that kind of like a summation of it?
Yeah, like even here's another example, because like right now I'm living in and becoming more aware of my middle-aged subgroup. And so I realized that often there are, like if I like to read the news, but I realized that sometimes you'll click on an article and it turns out to be a video. I don't want to watch a video.
Yeah, yeah,
Sometimes it's a matter of circumstance. Sometimes it's just a matter of, no, I want to read it. I don't want to watch it.
yeah,
And so I realized that's probably part of my age group. Like, I don't need a video, just give me the text. But at the same time, what I was aware of being in a training session one time, and there was a combination of some videos and text. And so every video actually had a transcript below it. And so you could basically choose your own adventure. Do you want to
yeah,
watch the video, or would you prefer to read the text, or both? And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. Like it was like they read my mind,
yeah,
because every now and then I'm like, sure, I'll watch a video, especially depending on, if it's really short. But other times I'm like, no, I really just prefer to read the article. But I had the opportunity to actually choose what I wanted, rather than being, okay, it has to be print, it has to be video. I had the option of accessing one or both. And I was like, oh, wow, this is kind of nice. Like, if everybody would do that, it would be so much better.
yeah. I tell this story often about Jonathan, who of course is an immigrant to the US. And he changed phone companies a little while ago because he's still working on his English, but Jonathan's a lot more techie than I am. And so whenever we were with one company, we would go, and depending upon the person working in the store, if they spoke English, if they spoke Spanish or not, I would go, and then I would with him, and we'd have to translate, and sometimes it go well, sometimes it wouldn't. One time we did find a guy who spoke Spanish, but we could tell that like he was really struggling through the responses because they were more technical, right? And so totally get that, totally understand. But the reason why he switched to this other company was because the guy who worked in the store was fully bilingual, like, and Jonathan didn't need me to, or he didn't, feel like more comfortable for me to go into the store with him. He could just go on his own, ask his question. They can nerd out together over these technical specifications and all that other kind of stuff. And it was just an overall better experience for him. But why did that exist? Because the store realized that, hey, we've got this different type of clientele in this area. So it would be better for us to impact our environment, our water, by having bilingual staff consistently in this store. And it was a completely different sort of relationship. And I see those types of things happen quite a bit. It's not like it's just small little things, but that can make a really big difference overall in people's comfort level, in what they prefer, in what they need to, go deep and build relationships with you, which is of course what we want, because relationships build loyalty, right? So, and improve success.
Absolutely. Yes.
All right. Are there any other recommendations or best practices that you've identified over the years that can help people who are newer to this whole digging into data by subgroups process and figuring out like what the story is behind the data so they can make adjustments?
I'd say definitely make the data accessible, but at the same time, you don't want so much data that you become paralyzed with, I don't know where to start. You have to make it accessible but also usable, because you have to act on it. And so then the other piece of that is, sometimes we like to have quick answers. We want to, okay, I looked at it, I see the problem, I have a solution, go. we have to be comfortable with the discomfort, because sometimes you're going to see some data and it may feel kind of icky.
Yeah.
And, so we don't like to feel icky, but sometimes we need to feel icky. And
Yeah.
then we move forward. We have to figure out, okay, so what am I going to do about it? And how is that going to look? We can't just stay in, well, this is what the data says, and this is why the data says it. But, okay, what am I going to do about it? And how does that then transfer to the people that I'm serving? So,
Yeah.
I think that's probably those two things: make it accessible, but then also like use it.
One other quick question on this and finding the story. Are you often able to find the story through more data, or does it have to, or does it like through some of those other qualitative factors that you talked about earlier when we first started? That, or does it you need research or anything like that to fill in
I
blanks?
think it can be a combination of things, because sometimes more data just leaves you overwhelmed. But at the same time, you don't want so little that you're coming to the wrong conclusions. But it really does come from having conversations with people and being part of the work, because it's easy to just, have a spreadsheet and be like, okay, this is what's going on. But if you're not in there, for me, if I'm not in there side by side with teachers, looking at what's happening in the classroom, giving them feedback, providing support, talking to students, finding out what's going on, then when I do look at the data, I'm more informed, because I've been present in the whole process, rather than looking at it as an outsider, like, oh, well, this is what's going on, and this is what the problem is, and this is what the solution is. It's hard to come to the right conclusions if you're not in it doing the work.
Yeah.
And so, that's really important. Sometimes less is more, but at the same time, you need enough, but not so much that you become overwhelmed.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. Deborah, this has been so rich, so great. And I'm so thankful that we finally got to do it. It's well worth the wait. Well worth the wait. Let's switch gears a little bit before we bring this one home. Can you tell me about a time when a brand made you feel like you belonged, you as a consumer?
All right. I'll give two examples. One, we went on a dinner cruise recently, and I was nervous, because I just know that when it comes to food and my food allergy, that it can be a little tricky. And so I was very much relieved that when I was making this online reservation, there was a specific question that asked about food sensitivities, and then followed up with, like, based on what I had entered or what I had selected, then it was like, okay, well, then you want to choose from this or this. And so I was like, oh, yay, this is awesome. And then when we got on the cruise, they had little name tags for everyone. But on my name tag, it specifically listed what my food allergy was, so that as the people were serving the food at that table, there was a clear indicator, without me feeling like, oh, I'm the only one with a name tag. I'm now over here because I can't have this or that. Like, I felt like I was a part of that cruise just like anybody else, but that they were aware of what I needed and what was going to make me have a successful experience. So that's one. And then another one I've become more aware of recently is, like, when I do travel, and in the hotels, they used to give you those little mini bottles of shampoo and conditioner. And, as a person with natural hair, those little teeny tiny bottles of shampoo and conditioner were never enough. And so more and more, I'm seeing that hotels will actually have those pumps of shampoo and conditioner, so that you use whatever it is that you need. And it seems like a simple thing, but I can tell you that I'm always like, oh, wow, they did this just for me anytime I see that, because I feel seen.
Mhm.
And, it's not having to go down to the desk, hey, can I get 4 more bottles of conditioner? It's, oh, wow, I can have exactly what I need to meet my needs while I'm here on this stay. So those are two recent experiences that I've had, where I just, it's nice to feel like, wow, they thought about my needs, not just the one size fits all.
Yeah, and super helpful if, like, you're not checking a bag, so you can't bring, like, your giant bottle from home, and you need to, like,
Yes.
have something else, so
And can I add one more thing about the dinner cruise now that I think about it? We were also traveling with my mother in law, who has mobility challenges. And so it was a multi-level ship. And they put us on the first floor because they knew that, they thought to ask. And so we actually checked the box. Yes, we have someone traveling with us that has mobility issues. So we were able to be on the ground floor so that she could enjoy that cruise rather than we get there and it's like, oh, this isn't going to work. I guess we're not going to go because we're not going to go without her. But it was just nice that even that was thought of.
Very cool. Very cool. They did y'all right. I like it. I like it. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you and your work?
So I am on X, formerly known as Twitter. I haven't made that switch in my mind yet. I still call it Twitter. My handle is at Depic Math, DEPIC Math. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear from your listeners.
All right. I'll drop a link to that in the show notes as well. Deborah, again, this has been a true treat. Any parting words of wisdom for marketers and business leaders who want to do a better job of using data to achieve better outcomes and customer success for all, because all means all the people that they serve?
I'd say definitely when you focus on those subgroups, it's a win-win for everybody. Because here I am almost a year later talking about this dinner cruise. It's like, hey, this was awesome. I'm going to go and tell people about it. I'm going to share my experience because, again, we have many different identities, many different subgroups that we belong to. And even if you're not part of a particular subgroup at one point, currently, that doesn't mean that at some point you won't be. And so the more opportunities that you create for your customer to enjoy your product, the whole 18 to 84, you will have lifelong customers, not just for a season, but for a lifetime.
Very cool. Thank you, Deborah, for stopping by.
Oh, you're welcome.
That's it for today's episode. If you like this show, I would so appreciate it if you'd share it with a friend, colleague, and your network. It really does go a long way towards helping more people discover the show. Another quick question for you. Are you getting the Inclusion and Marketing newsletter? If not, really, what are you even doing? Each week, I send news, insights, resources, and other commentary to help you attract and retain a bigger, more diverse, and fiercely loyal customer base. Go to inclusionandmarketing.com/newsletter to get signed up. I'll also drop a link for it in the show notes for you below so you can access it easily. Until next time, remember, everyone deserves to have a place where they belong. Let's use our individual and collective power to ensure more people feel like they do. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to you soon.